Hello friends, and welcome back for another Laurel and Hardy video. I'm ranking their movies all the way to my #1 pick for their best film. Now it's been a little while since my last video on Laurel and Hardy. Just got sidetracked with music stuff and Beach Boys stuff, and I couldn't help it, Ollie, because I was just trying to do this video and I didn't know it, as Stanley would have put it. Of course I'm no Stanley. But anyway, last time we talked about Swiss Miss, that's where we left off. Swiss Miss is my pick for the weakest of their Hal Roach era films. It has some really good ideas, a few strong casting choices, a couple great gags, and a few good songs, but the problem is the confusion behind the scenes with Stan Laurel kind of stepping back and other people coming forward to do most of the production work really hurt the movie. There's some gags with no setup or no payoff, like the stuff with the gorilla. There's a song that's weirdly partially edited out of the film, so there's these random lyrics that come out of nowhere, and some of the better cast members like Eric Blore are given nothing to do. It's a very uneven film, and at the end of the day, not especially satisfying. But now we're getting into kind of another tier of Laurel and Hardy movies, ones I think there's a lot to enjoy in, the missteps are fewer, they might not be the classics, but they're certainly worth a watch. So let's jump in and take a look at another Hal Roach film and kick off this section of my Laurel and Hardy movie ranking. Thanks for joining us. So let's pick up in our ranking with another Hal Roach era film, lower than where most people would probably put it. Next up comes 1940's A Chump at Oxford. My big issue with A Chump at Oxford is it feels like several kind of sketches or short subject films strung together. And this is not entirely the movie's fault, as we'll talk about its alternate edit here in just a moment. But Chump at Oxford is a very simple story. Stan and Ollie foil a bank robbery, are rewarded with an Oxford scholarship, go to the school, are bullied by some of their peers, and then Stanley gets a bump on the head, and it turns out he's actually the long-lost genius of Oxford University, Lord Paddington, which causes Ollie to completely rethink and recontextualize their relationship with one another. A lot of good ideas there and some very funny gags, especially Stanley as the snooty Lord Paddington. There's a really good gag involving Professor Einstein needs to come to the school for your help. And Stanley, of course, I'll gladly help the dear boy, that sort of thing, to which Ollie replies that just a short time ago he would not have known Einstein from a beer stein. That sort of thing. But the problem with Chump at Oxford, again, is it's just several sketches loosely tied together. Part of this is because it was originally conceived as one of Hal Roach Studios' streamliner movies. If you're familiar with public domain musicals, you might have heard of Fiesta, a 41-minute color kind of musical extravaganza. Chump at Oxford's from that same school. It was originally, intended to be about 42 minutes long, basically a shorter version of the theatrical film that most of us are familiar with, and that this way it could play kind of, longer than a short subject but shorter than a feature. They could kind of rearrange a bill to accommodate more movies and stuff. This idea never really caught on, and Hal Roach Studios only made a handful of these streamliners. But the Chump at Oxford streamliner omits kind of the opening of the movie, which is a redo of Stan and Ollie's silent short subject film From Soup to Nuts. Now, it does have a fun cast, and I think From Soup to Nuts, those scenes do kind of benefit with having sound in them. We get some funny reactions, we get Ollie bossing all the dinner guests around the table, pick up your eats, take them with you, move over there, that sort of thing, and those little bits help. And honestly, the streamliner version uses some alternate takes and edits and things, which I'll post the website that details all of that below for you. But it's certainly not essential viewing. I would say the extended, proper theatrical version is much better because the Oxford scenes are basically the same, again barring a few little alternate doodads here and there, while it has an entire additional scene. There are some cool bits in Chump at Oxford too involving the cast. A young Peter Cushing pops up as one of the students who bully Stan and Ollie. Mark Hamill said when he was working with Peter Cushing on the first Star Wars film, the first thing he wanted to talk to him about was working with Laurel and Hardy on this movie. So that's pretty cool. Charlie Hall, a frequent Laurel and Hardy supporting character, also pops up. Always a welcome addition in one of their films. And Wilford Lucas, who played the prison warden in Pardon Us, which we'll get to eventually, appears as the very stuffy dean. Stan and Ollie make fun of him repeatedly. He's usually the butt of the joke, that kind of thing. I like Jump at Oxford, but again, we skip from this dinner party scene to them foiling the bank robbery to a scene where they arrive at Oxford and are sent into a hedge maze where there are some gags involving students dressed as ghosts and ghouls, frightening them, to them barging into the dean's quarters, to Stanley suddenly regaining his, lost mind as this brilliant Lord Paddington. It just feels sort of pieced together. I wish they'd gone maybe a more creative route, or maybe had some callbacks to earlier in the story. It's a lot of fun. I don't know, a lot of people really enjoy it and consider it essential Laurel and Hardy. I'm not quite a big fan of that because I think it could have been much better. A longer running time might even have helped it. They showed Stan and Ollie graduating the college or something like that at the end. I think would have been kind of a more beneficial ending, would have had a little more power to it. But at the end of the day, certainly a lot of fun. We're now firmly in kind of that mid-tier of their movies. Ones that, yeah, they're not the greatest in the world, but they're certainly pleasant to watch. Let's jump back for a few of their later Fox films now, shall we? And now for our next movie, Sim Salabim! What's this? 1942's A Haunting We Will Go. I found this to be one of the toughest Laurel and Hardy films to rank, because A Haunting We Will Go is very heavily plotted. Indeed, it was planned as a completely different type of film originally, according to the booklet and several other sources. It started as kind of a straight gangster film, or maybe kind of like a gangster comedy, serial comedy kind of thing, and somehow evolved over time into a Laurel and Hardy vehicle. The direction was done by Alfred Worker, who is known for directing great dramas. Indeed, the booklet states that many people of Fox lamented that this man, who apparently had no sense of humor, would be directing comedy films and didn't quite understand how that worked. But it also has a lot of weird, surreal humor, which is something we haven't really seen in Laurel and Hardy's work since the early 30s. And I kind of like that. It gives A Haunting We Will Go a really cool personality. Not to mention, it kind of has its own image. The very famous scenes of the duo in their turbans and their stage garb. Very distinctive. It kind of sets it apart from some of those other Fox films which kind of run together in places. So I found A Haunting We Will Go pretty tough to rank. But at the end of the day, it is an interesting film. I can have a good time with it. Stan and Ollie are asked to transport a casket, supposedly containing a dead body, but actually containing a gangster looking to get home and claim an inheritance. And that coffin is switched with a coffin for Dante the Magician's stage show, so it's full of his props and flyers for his show and things like that, and chaos ensues. That is a grossly oversimplified idea of the film, but I guess you kind of get at least the general picture from there. There are so many scenes of the gangsters kind of talking and setting things up. It's a good cast, including Elisha Cook Jr., fresh off his success as Wilmer in The Maltese Falcon, and several great character actors too, like Lou Lubin's in there, that sort of thing, and Don Costello, who we've seen in a couple other Laurel and Hardy films. So it's a good cast, but again, it doesn't feel much like a Laurel and Hardy film. There's a big setup where the duo is not even really involved. And then, of course, once they get on the train, they run into other con artists, one of whom played by Richard Lane, who sell them Inflato, a small machine they can put a dollar bill in, turn the crank, it spits out a 10, that sort of thing. Stan and Ollie naturally want to use Inflato to save the world, not realizing it's all a gimmick, and of course there's a funny scene of them getting stuff caught in it and breaking it, and so on. And then Dante recruits them, and then the big mix-up with the caskets happen, and there's a lot of backstage hijinks during the show. Again, it's kind of all over the place. It was the kind of movie that either needed to be longer and kind of flesh things out, or needed to be sort of streamlined and keep this runtime, which I think is 68 minutes, excuse me. So about a 70-minute film. You can't really have all these different angles and plot threads and things like that. The juvenile male and female leads. The female lead, of course, the great Sheila Ryan. She popped up with them in Great Guns, which we'll get to a little bit later in this series. But they don't really get anything to do. Dante the Magician's quite good, and he has a few scenes performing magic tricks and stuff, and I like those scenes. But at the end of the day, it feels like there's just too many cooks, too much stuff going on for it really to be effective. But nonetheless, Laurel and Hardy are quite good in it, and there's several scenes with special effects and weird things like that going on. You know, Ollie talks to himself with a phone booth at one point. He opens up the door and a double of himself comes out and they have a little conversation. That's pretty cool. There's a gag involving Stan shrinking at the end, which it's weird stuff. It's not going to appeal to everybody, which is probably why this is such a, you know, kind of divisive movie. But I like that that stuff is in there. I think it gives it some personality and kind of a unique idea. The ending does a pretty good job of summing everything up too, despite how heavily plotted it is for such a short runtime. I think it doesn't leave a lot of stuff hanging. You know, I was okay with that. I guess at the end of the day, it's all going to depend how much you want to see the group kind of out of their element, doing a different kind of movie. We know this doesn't always work, but I think there's a lot of joy to be had in A Haunting We Will Go. Last one for today comes from Laurel and Hardy's last major film from 1945, The Bullfighters. The group did one more movie after this. That was Utopia, also known as Atoll K. We talked about that back in the very first video in this series. But The Bullfighters is often seen as Laurel and Hardy's last true hurrah. And there are a lot of things to like about it. The group had much more influence behind the scenes than they had on any of their previous Fox films, so that was certainly a highlight. And indeed it shows. The group looks like they're having a good time, a lot of fun, and there are some really good gags here. They dig a couple oldies out that we don't see too often. The egg fight is lifted from the movie Hollywood Party, where they had battled Lupe Valiz. Here they battle a different actress in a much funnier version of the segment, and although it has some wacky sound effects, I think it delivers. They go back to their Hal Roach days to rework scenes from one of my favorite shorts of theirs, 1933's Going Bye-Bye, where Walter Long was trying to hunt them down for routing him out in court, and here the Richard K. Muldoon character, who is played by a weirdly uncredited Ralph Sanford, is hunting Stan and Ollie for ruining his life and career, saying he will skin them alive as soon as he catches them. First the big one, then the little one, that kind of thing. So a lot of fun to be had there. Indeed, I wish they'd credited Ralph Sanford because he's really good in this. A few other interesting cast notes too while we're at it. Richard Lane, who we mentioned in Haunting We Will Go, pops up again here as Hotshot, a big promoter for Mexican bullfighting, who claims that he will rat Stan and Ollie out to Muldoon and have them murdered if they don't allow Stanley to replace Don Sebastian, his bullfighting doppelganger, in the arena. Now, we've talked before, generally speaking, Laurel and Hardy didn't play other characters in their films by this point. Most of their non-Stan and Ollie roles are before they were paired together back in the silent movie days. But we see a few exceptions. Stanley is Lord Paddington in the aforementioned Jump at Oxford. We talked about Jitterbugs in a previous video, where both of them get a chance to play different characters, that sort of thing. But here, Stanley, dubbed of course by a different actor, but nonetheless gets to play Don Sebastian the bullfighter in a couple brief scenes. For some reason, again, a clone of Stan Laurel in some ways, because they're played by the same actor. Interesting stuff there. A lot of fun to be had, but at the end of the day, I find the bullfighters to be not especially memorable. There aren't a lot of like standout moments to it, and a lot of it I kind of forget about. Now, some of this is because virtually every comedian or comedy team has their bullfighting / trip to Mexico film. Abbott and Costello, Mexican Hayride. Eddie Cantor did Kid from Spain. The Stooges did What's the Matador and Sappy Bullfighters. So sometimes they just kind of run together. In many ways, there's only so many slapstick gags you can do as a toreador or a matador and that sort of thing. And another part of this is, in the 1940s, there was a big push for kind of friendly relations between the U.S. and Mexico and Central South America, that sort of thing. And the Bullfighters, I know, was part of that kind of good neighbor policy, as was Disney's The Three Caballeros, which I just held up for you. So some of it is, I think, kind of a softer touch than we usually see in a Laurel and Hardy film, because they want to make sure that they are presenting Mexico in the most favorable light possible, you know, encouraging people to visit there and respect the culture and that sort of thing. So the Bullfighters, I think, doesn't go quite as wild and crazy as it maybe could have if they hadn't cared as much about that. I don't know, kind of strange. But Nonetheless, the Bullfighters is a pretty fun capstone to the group's career, certainly much more interesting than the misguided Utopia Atoll K fiasco. You can go back again to the first video and find out more about that, should you be interested. But at the end of the day, it's also really the only non-Hal Roach film that the group had a lot of positive things to say, probably because for the first time they felt like they were being respected and well treated and listened to. So, interesting stuff there. At the end of the day, a fun one, not an essential one, a good diversion, but not really a classic. So I hope you like my Laurel Hardy ranking so far. I promise I will not take as long to do the next video. I hope you'll tune in for that, but in the meantime we have some more Beach Boys stuff coming, as well as some Gary Lewis album reviews, and of course plenty of spooks and surprises for Halloween. Hope you'll join me for all of that. I'll see you next time, my friends. So long!